Hello, this is Henry Keane. This is UATV interview on UATV. Jason J. Smart, political advisor, is with us tonight. Hello, Jason. So thank you very much for joining.
It's good to see you, Henry.
Right, every media is now on it. The collapse of the Russian spring offensive. But what is it? I mean, the Russians are pushing, but to no great avail, if any. Why don't they stop, Jason, and regroup if the offensive is actually collapsing, or it is not?
Well, it seems it probably is collapsing, and the Russians at this point don't have the capacity to move forward. It doesn't matter if they regroup or not. They simply lack a strategy to do so. They lack the quantity of men they need to do so, and they lack the artillery and other things that they would need to do something serious. At this point, it seems that the Russian military is simply, keeping time. It's just waiting for there to be negotiations. That's what the hope is. They have to continue showing that they're defending their line, that they're pushing forward, because otherwise Ukraine would just push through them and take back the territory. But to actually progress, to actually really make progress, it's very clear they're not doing that, and it doesn't seem that they have any intention to do so. I don't think that there's a general in Moscow who has an idea of how to get out of the quagmire that they're currently in.
Okay, if they're showing that they're doing something, but it seems like the offensive is onwards, despite the catastrophic losses. We all know Putin just doesn't care about any life, even so this is Russian life. But can we say that the Kremlin is deliberately burning resources? Because why? Or there is no connection with that whatsoever?
So I think that we have to understand that it's two different things. On one side of this, we have the most simple part of it, which is that simply there is no other strategy of how they can do what they're trying to do, which is to keep their place on the map. But second to that, and I think it's probably deeper and more fundamental, is the fact that today there is a lot of people in Russia, specifically those from the intelligence services, who probably aren't anxious to see these soldiers come back to Russia. They would prefer to see them just die while they're in Ukraine so that they do not come back armed and disgruntled. And so I think this is part of the conflict that we see currently in Moscow between the intelligence services and the military. The military right now is being crushed. We saw that all the people around Shoigu have been arrested in the past year. A number of them have been arrested or on home arrest. A lot of them have been forced retired or resigned from their positions in the Ministry of Defense. And it's all indicative of the fact that today there's a serious war going on between the major clans of Moscow.
Okay, and what about those 400,000, a bit over actually, that the Putin is going to recruit soon? So obviously more cannon fodder will be sent to the front lines.
I don't think they really will. I mean, that's a huge number. Let's remember,
Really?
month over month, the Russian military right now, it's the Russian military right now, month over month, is lacking about 9,000 men as a shortage. They can't come up with them. That's despite the fact that I think it's about 15% of the regions of Russia have significant economic hardship. And one of the leading reasons is because they have to pay so much for men to go join the military. I don't see where they're going to get the liquidity to pay for that many men. Look at St. Petersburg. Right now, the current fee to join the Russian military, the one-off fee is about $25,000, $26,000. By comparison, a teacher in the course of a year makes about $7,800. So when you think what incredible money they're spending for a guy to go there, he's there for, a very short period of time before he's casualtied. What are they getting for that? It's a very bad return on investment. So I don't think realistically they're going to be able to, even if they wish to recruit that many soldiers. It's just very unlikely.
I'll take that for a likely answer. I like that. But let me switch the focus a bit. Now, with this war in Iran, as soon as the United States was destructed, and it is destructed, Donald Trump at least, the Kremlin immediately hits the brakes on peace talks, so-called peace talks. But when Volodymyr Zelensky speaks of his bad feeling, I mean his premonition of his, is that political rhetoric or some real intel behind that, you think?
Well, I think that, listen, what's going on right now in the Middle East is truly Pandora's box. It's not clear where that's going. And a lot can happen. Really, a lot can happen. And it's not clear if this is good or better or worse for Ukraine or for Russia. It can go either way. For Russia, this definitely can turn out badly as well. I know that they get a short-term reprieve in the oil that a lot of people think it's really going to help Russia, which I don't believe. Simply, it's not the way it works. One, they're working in a black market, but secondly, they have long-term agreements in that black market. They can't just change the price. But even if they go to the white market, they still have the European limit on the price cap on oil sales and how much they can sell for, which is about $44.10. The national budget of Russia requires them to sell oil for about $59 per barrel. That's simply not enough money. Russia will either way be in a massive deficit. Just in the first 2 months of the year, they blew through their entire estimated budget deficit for all of 2026. The Russian economy right now is in dire straits, and it's only going to get worse. But when we look at the Middle East, I think it's more likely to be negative for Russia than positive. And initially I was also very concerned that it could be positive for Russia. But let's remember that a lot of the parts that they still use for Shahed drones do come from Iran. A lot of parts they have for their missiles come from Iran. And today, I don't know what the capacity of Iran is to be mass producing things as it was before, and what that means for the long-term ability for Russia to wage war.
Okay. I will try to make a statement now, and you can agree or disagree. If I say, Jason, that Donald Trump has no plan whatsoever how to end the war in Ukraine, would you agree?
I would agree with that. And about the war in Iran, probably the same answer.
By the way. So, my next question was why Russians are doing that. And okay, Putin is doing that in the first place. What keeps Putin in this war? What's in it for him? He's afraid of Russian soldiers coming back home. Is that it?
Well, I think that Vladimir Putin, on the operative level, day to day, I'm not sure to which level he's actually involved in decision making. But just like what's going on right now within the Ministry of Defense, I think it's really worth paying attention to. If you look at the different people who have been moved out, like Bolasov, who's the new Minister of Defense as of last year, he's somebody who comes from the Sechin gang. Sechin is the head of Rosneft, but he's also tied to people like Bortnikov. He's the head tied to people that are coming from the Foreign Intelligence Service and Domestic Intelligence Services. We see that these different clans right now are fighting over who's going to take over what positions. And I think that's actually a very significant reason for everything that we see going on right now inside of Ukraine, everything that we see in negotiations. It really ties back to that. Vladimir Putin has not been seen publicly since March 9th. That was after the Ayatollah got assassinated by the US and Israel. And that's because he has a very significant fear of what's happening. You've seen all the videos and the photos coming into Moscow, the huge numbers of police, FSO, which is the Secret Service of Russia, that are stationed around the Kremlin, as well as a lot of National Guard. And by the way, just think about how many soldiers you asked about the recruitment numbers for next year. Consider this. The Russian National Guard, which essentially just provides security for Putin, plus, of course, it takes care of, in theory, domestic things such as protests, which they don't really have anymore, plus things like taking care of domestic infrastructure, guarding it, I should say. They have about 350,000 to 400,000 soldiers just in that. So why aren't they going to Ukraine? If Russia really wanted soldiers to go, they've got hundreds of thousands sitting around doing nothing. Why aren't they sending them? It's Putin tries to keep them in Moscow because they have more important things to do, which is he's worried about his regime stability. That's why Zolotov, who's the head of the National Guard, was given tanks last year by Putin. Why do you need tanks in Moscow? They don't really anticipate there would be a Ukrainian invasion. They don't anticipate a NATO invasion. It's because they're worried about having conflict with the military and they need to be able to suppress it.
Okay, but are you telling me that if there is a scenario in which the Kremlin itself will want to stop without military defeat, it would have to be the coup in Moscow or Putin's death? Is that?
I think Putin's death is ultimately going to be what does it, yes. But in the short term of it, I think realistically, Vladimir Putin has no interest in ending this war for a lot of reasons. One, their domestic economy can't survive it. I mean, it is a huge percent of their economy right now is being funded by the war effort. And it's creating a lot of inflation. But at the same time, a lot of people are benefiting from it. A lot of people, especially those that are close to Putin. And who does he care most about? I mean, obviously, it's not the rank and file of the Russian soldiers. They have no inherent value, right? So what he does care about, though, are those who can actually change things in Russia. And that's the elite, the upper class. And they are benefiting a lot from this war. So I don't see any upside for him to end this war. I don't see why he would do that. At the same time, I think that what he's waiting for and what he would probably hope for at this point is that the U.S. side will put more pressure on Ukraine to make a deal, which essentially means that Ukraine gives away territory. I think that's what they're hoping for. Is that simply that the U.S. will take the side of Russia de facto and say, "Listen, Ukraine, it's time for you to agree to give up this territory because we won't allow you to get more weapons from the United States, or let the Europeans buy weapons from the United States. And so this is the only option you have." I think that's what the Russians are hoping for.
And what are Ukrainian cards in all this? Like strikes on oil facilities and depots because it's working, is it?
Yes, it's working. The best thing that can happen is that there is more attacks within Russia, attacking especially its economy. Ultimately, Vladimir Putin, the only thing that would cause him to change his course of action is the day that he realizes there's a personal risk to himself or to his regime. Because at that point, it's no longer just some guys dying out in Donbass he doesn't care about. This is all something he really cares about, which is himself. And so when he realizes that now his regime is truly being challenged to a point that it might break, that's when he starts to take things seriously. And I think that's exactly what we need to see, is that Russia today realizes that this war is not a distant fight. It's something that's come to them.
Yeah, but at some degree, indeed. But some, I still hear these voices. Some say Russia has already adapted to all these sanctions and can continue. I don't know, like forever. Is that right?
No, they can't continue forever. And eventually it will collapse. Listen, the banking sector today has got significant liquidity problems. The amount of toxic loans they have in their banking sector is actually phenomenal. And especially ones, because the government, so people don't understand, is the government in Russia doesn't have enough money. So one of the ways that they get more money, aside from printing it, which isn't great for inflation, is that they take out loans. They force banks to give them loans. And then they take that money to go buy things, let's say tanks. But the problem with that is that when you go out and take out loans from a bank to go buy tanks, is that that's not like a business loan where you're going to repay it. Because a tank, it goes off to Ukraine, and a few days later it's destroyed. And you don't even get the metal back because that scrap metal stays in Ukraine. So that money is just lost. That means the banks now have a hole in their budget. And we know that's a problem because there are think tanks that are affiliated with the Kremlin, that is financed by the Kremlin, who even last year, November, were saying that there could be cascading defaults in the Russian banking sector before the next year. And that was already November. So how many months
Right.
later is this? So there's significant problems in Russia.
Well, again, this is a mounting pressure. I understand that, but could it lead to economic collapse of the Russian Empire, or otherwise, it could solidify the nation and become a step forward to a greater militarization of Great Mother Russia? Is that possible? Which one is more likely, you think?
Well, they're definitely going to try to militarize it. I mean, I think everything that's going on right now with turning off the internet in Moscow and St.
Fair enough.
Petersburg, that's the objective. That's exactly where it's going. I don't think it's by coincidence. If you look at who owns the systems in Russia today that are doing all the things like Srom, which is the one that is used to listen to phone calls, or if you look at the other ones that they have, all these different systems, the ownership are people such as I just saw this morning, Patrushev, who is a top person in the Putin world. His son, his younger son, is now one of the major shareholders of the company that's going to be involved in making sure there's no internet for people's cell phones. If you look at the elites in Russia and where their sons are, a lot of them are directly working in these businesses. For instance, Max, the telecommunications, the app, that's owned by a relative of Vladimir Putin. All of this has a direct personal financial interest to people within the regime. And that's why I think they're going to crack down more, is that it's simply more profitable.
And the Max is working, actually, sometimes it looks like it's working for Ukraine because it shows Crimea as Ukraine. We've all saw these meetings. It was a lot of fun, really. Um, let's go transatlantic for a minute, shall we? Britain, Spain, Zelensky. I might be wrong, but I have a feeling as well as Zelensky. Zelensky seems to be literally following the crumbs and, signing agreements where Donald Trump couldn't do any better than, to have an ultimatum or two, let's put it that way. So how would you estimate the results of recent Zelensky's diplomatic international voyage?
And he's doing a good job. It's a very difficult position he's in, of course, but there's still a great deal of international support for Ukraine. That's not changed. Unfortunately, I think that it's as time passes, people have other priorities, but it doesn't speak to the fact that people in the United States, including a polling in the United States of Republicans, shows the vast majority of Republicans support Ukraine. There's, of course, a split within them of those who support more financing for weapons for Ukraine, for instance, but still, the support for Russia is non existent anywhere in any country. Well, I can't say any country, it's not true. Serbia, it's very high. But other countries, normal countries, there's not strong support for Russia. And that's why I think that today, Zelensky is doing what he can to make sure that the world remembers what's going on right now in Ukraine.
Since there are normal countries and not so normal countries, Europe in general, is Europe weak, Jason?
It's definitely needs to become stronger. I mean, the reality
Right.
is that and that's something that I think everybody knew before. I mean, I was talking about this 10 years ago. So I mean, I definitely think that Europe needs to have its own plans outside the United States.
Right. Well,
And Donald Trump has made that very clear why that is. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's true. Is that if you're dependent on somebody, and it can be very flippant as we're seeing today. That one day we're talking about Greenland, and less than 90 days later, it's attacking Iran, and only how many days between those was the situation with Maduro. So I think that it's worthwhile to be very cautious that you're dependent on somebody who's really mm, it's unsure to everybody what will come next.
so Donald Trump wasn't willing to help, but he helped, and now Europe is more solidified. It's coming. It's waking up, so to say. Can this grow into new security architecture for Europe without dependence that much on Washington? Or better ask, Jason, should it grow to that?
Yeah, it absolutely should, and it will. I have no doubt that it will, and it's necessary. And more than that, I think that right now we're seeing. You probably remember already 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I remember during the Biden administration. Still, we're always hearing that there's a shortage globally of air defense, of Patriot missiles, and it is sort of incredible to me when you consider the massive size of the U.S. Military-industrial complex, plus the Europeans, plus all the other countries that are buying American goods. There's still a global shortage that's so large that we haven't been able to figure out how to fill that hole. So I think that there needs to be other solutions, other alternatives. Of course, something like the Patriot missile system took a lot of years and a lot of money to develop, but still, the broad assortment of things that are possible to be produced in Europe that are perhaps more generic would be something that would definitely work in Europe's long-term interest.
You know how it goes. Necessity breeds innovation, so I'm sure we will see alternative to Patriot systems that take so much time to deliver. But some say, and it sounds nice, but they say Middle East countries that they want to help to be mediators between Ukraine, Russia, and United States to help to end the war in Ukraine. How real is that? How can it be any effective? Is that likely to happen? Do you believe?
Well, I think it's sort of interesting always with peace negotiations. You remember how Vladimir Putin also offered to help with Iran
Right.
and the United States twice? He offered back in October and he offered again recently. And what's interesting about both cases, though, is that every country likes to offer to help because it allows them to leverage that position for something that they have. So in this case, obviously, in the case of Vladimir Putin, it would be that listen, we can make peace here in the Middle East. Iran won't be a problem. In exchange, Mr. Trump, we'd like to have a part of Ukraine. That's how the way that sort of equation works. Now, in the case of the Arab countries, it's probably a different equation, different calculus, but still, they have an interest also in having global leverage and showing that they're not just regional players, but global. And so I think that it's not surprising that they will try to project themselves as being a power that will have the capacity to make significant inroads in a peace process.
And in this global calculus, in this global equation, territorial concessions, is that the red line for Ukraine, you think, Jason?
I think so. I mean, and ultimately, I think that Ukraine is right to wait. Russia can't continue this forever. It's becoming more difficult for Russia to continue this, and I think the pressure will mount over time. We just have to make sure that we turn up the heat.
You just took these words out of my mouth and my head. Thank you so very much for being so experienced in things that you talk about, and I hope we can do it sometime again. Maybe we're closer to a better change for Ukraine, and let's hope so.
I hope so.
Thank you so very much, Jason. We talk. Goodbye. We just talked to Jason J. Smart, PhD, political advisor, and a fine gentleman, if you ask me. Thank you so very much. I'm Henry Keane. We're UATV. Stay safe and tune for more. Goodbye.